everyone, this is going to be a very long one for my standards, and I don't want to waste anyone's time. I want to get right into this. There's just one thing. Before I do, and no, it's not asking you to like and subscribe, it's emphasis on this message from Dana and Amphibia creator Matt. So, just to make things clear, I'm not going to judge the show on what could have been, for the most part, and instead on what it is. Both in terms of the positives and its faults. I'm not just going to lump everything on Disney. Anything less, I feel, would be a disrespect to the show and its creators behind it. With that out of the way, there's really nothing more I want to say. Let's get started, shall we? Woo! Honestly, there's definitely an argument for Witches Before Wizards not being at the very bottom of the list. And, as is the same for pretty much all of even the lowest episodes, there are still some good parts of it. To be specific, the ending, where we first see the Boiling Isles for what it really is, one of the most hardcore settings in media. And the little talk between Ida and Luz about how we have to make our own paths instead of believing we're chosen is really nice and actually fits in very nicely to the finale. And there's also the scene that works quite well with Luz's arc about the potential of a real fantasy life instead of being bullied in the more realistic world. So there is good stuff that still makes it required watching for any new viewer. If I made a tier list for this series, even the lowest tier would just be okay episodes. The problem is, well, the main great scene I mentioned is the last 30 seconds of the episode, give or take. And the other 20 minutes are just, well, aren't that great. Seeing Luz delivering potions isn't very enthralling, there's a reason we never see it again. And then, well, there's the fake wizard and the quest. Look, I know it's supposed to be generic, I know that's the point, but it's just not funny enough and not creepy enough. To the point where you're just kind of sat waiting for Luz to find out it's not real. What a shocker. The only other upside this episode has is that it's pretty funny when it wants to be. And it's nice to see more budding seeds of this found family grow, but it's not quite enough to save this episode from the bottom of the barrel. Witches Before Wizards is the closest the show gets to quote-unquote boring, and was probably the closest I got to dropping it. Now, this episode I've already gone over in a lot of detail actually in a semi-recent video, so if you want to know my more detailed thoughts on why I think the Owl House's very first episode missed the mark, go have a watch of that, and then come back to this pretty please. But to TLDR, a combination of really strange writing decisions, very forced thematic messages, slow and clumsy comedy, and no real hook to get your attention and make you want to keep watching, is what keeps A Lying Witch and a Warden so low. So yeah, that's the first two episodes and the single lowest ones on this list. To say the Owl House gets off on a rocky start is a bit of an understatement. But to anyone watching it, I say this: keep going, it's worth it. Let them cook. Okay, first of all, did anyone else think that the demon hunters, specifically this guy, were going to be way more important to the overall story than they ended up being? Or at least more than the one-off baddie? I bet you completely forgot they existed, didn't you? The episode lands squarely in the area of just okay. I appreciate the big ol' shout out to Baba Yaga in the form of the Walking Owl House, and the foreshadowing of these three being some of the strongest, most skilled witches on the Isles is actually pretty cool. But there's really not much meat on the bone when it comes to what's actually featured here. On one side we have a going against the bullies story where they never properly interact with the bullies, that turns into a very forgettable fight with a very forgettable antagonist. And on the other side you have Tibbles, who, I mean, there's a reason even the show started to turn towards the fact that he's an annoying, unlikable character, and not unlikable in the good way. And this first episode is a big reason why. He's not threatening, he's not funny, he's not charismatic, he's not even that hateable to the point where you can be too happy when his stall is smashed. Yeah, there's not really much else to say about this one. Favourite line goes to Luz's genuine anger here. Here we are, the big one. I'm not gonna lie, when I finally caught up with the Owl House and got into the fandom side of things, I was kinda shocked to find that Once Upon a Swap was generally seen as the worst, most disliked episode. I mean, I suppose I can see where it comes from, and it's not like I have it particularly high, it's still in the bottom 5. For one, it really goes out of its way to emphasise how nonsensical Ida's business is. Like, apparently she doesn't want to be noticed by any authorities, but she's always casually walking around and out in the open, often making a big deal of herself. And yes, it doesn't advance the plot or push forward any big character arcs, so you could technically define it as the new flanderized version of the word filler. But you know what? I can look past that, because there is some great stuff in here. For one, it's really good to see our main trio just messing around and having fun, something that is few and far between after season 1. Ida's part of the tale is by far the least interesting, at least to me, but it's made up for by the other two. Teenage King is an absolute delight, oh my god. I wouldn't go as far to say he carries the episode, but he almost does. Luz as Ida is a riot as well, even if that face is just a little uncanny. And it does bring up the question of how wild magic actually works. Does she need to, just think about anything she wants? The show purposefully goes out of its way to not explain this multiple times, and it's a shame because so much of this lore is so interesting and fun. So yeah, I'm aware that Once Upon a Swap is not the greatest episodes, but long story short, does it deserve all the ridicule thrown at it by the fan base over the years? The answer is a little. But it's not entirely irredeemable. And if you watch it for what it is, a harmless piece of fluff back when times were simpler for the Owl House, you'll have a very good time. Sense and Insensitivity isn't that bad an episode. It's a good bit of fun, and in the grand scheme of things, it does add to the series as a whole when you're first watching it, by building upon Lucy's and King's relationship, and it does have its moments of deeper greatness. The conversation between Ida and Lilith at the end being the primary example. It's a great early look into the more complex character that is Ida's sister. Now that being said, it's as low as it is for a reason. The rest of the episode just isn't great. Until the very, very end, Ida and Lilith's whole subplot feels just kind of meandering. It's basically the kind of thing that, again, the new bastardization of the word filler has emerged from. It feels like padding, because we can't have a big confrontation between these two yet, so let's have them chase some random magical immortality flower. Yeah, sure, why not? It's not like it, or what should be more important, Ida's uncertainty about her age, ever comes back. The losing King part is actually a lot stronger. I really like the segment of them just writing a book together. It's a super sweet sequence, and it's nice to see them getting some brother-sister bonding in. They're the heart of the episode, and while I do think it falters pretty heavily with the villain of the week publisher, there's really not much to say about this guy, the heart with these main two is more than enough to keep me watching. Even this far down, I'd say we've passed the level of okay, and are now at the level of fun, good episodes. Man, do I feel sorry for Gus in this show. If getting the short end of the stick was a competition, this little guy would be bringing home the gold every day of the week. In his first ever episode with actual focus on him, you know what he gets? A liar reveal plotline, everyone's favourite, not at all tired and predictable trope. Yeah, the Gus part of the Gus episode is sadly the weakest aspect. I honestly think the Human Appreciation Society could be a genuinely interesting and really fun idea, but it just exists for haha, silly witches don't understand human objects jokes again and again and again, which we already have with Ida. Then there's Matholomew, which, I mean, we'll get into him more later, but he's one of the characters where the show, both before and after the cancellation, never really seemed to know quite what to do with. Luz and Ida are the best part of the episode by far. The latter especially. It's both hilarious to see her back at the school where she was the local terror, having to fix up her past crimes, and it's also really heartwarming, seeing her work so hard for the human that she's now quite attached to. We needed as much emotional connection as we can get between the two before the big season finale, and ironically, despite the fact that they're not interacting here, this is probably one of the best instances of it. And hey, we get more time with Bump, who's a really wholesome character that I wish was able to contribute more to the story. I say wholesome, but oh my god, what is going on with the school and detention, because this is some major red flags. Ida, you might be right about this. Yeah, really small problems is an episode that I'm pretty sure most people expected to be in the bottom 3. I'd say it's probably up there with Once Upon a Swap as the most disliked episode in the fandom, and I can certainly see why. It's a Tibbles episode, for God's sake, and the characters can seem overly cruel to King in sections, which is somewhat out of character for one or two of them, even if they've barely interacted before now. Now, subjectively, I can really emphasise with King's issues about feeling left out from a friend group, despite, actively hanging out with them. It's a strong emotion that I do really resonate with, even if it is at the expense of some slight character inconsistency. But even then, disregarding that, there are some really good parts. King's fear of Luz being gone is heartbreaking every time it appears, and this is no exception. It's the proper beginning of one of the best show-long arcs of someone who, for the vast majority of Season 1, you could definitely assume to be just the comedic role of the show. Speaking of comedy, when I went back to rewatch this episode, I didn't expect it to be so fucking funny, oh my god! I'm sorry, but Ida's side story is amazing. Not because it's deeper character building or anything, but because it never comes close to overstaying its welcome, and when it's on screen, I can't help but start giggling like an absolute idiot whenever I see the fun police. My sense of humour is really broken, huh? Willow and Gus don't really have any moments to shine, Season 1A, take a shot. But oddly enough, Tibbles is probably at his best in this episode, by far. It's Tibbles, so it's a bar that's firmly in the Mariana Trench, but he actually crosses the line here from annoying to all the way past tolerable and straight into fairly entertaining. Good for him. Escape of the Palismen. This one is definitely a mixed bag. Ida and King's side of the story isn't too much to write home about until the very end, which seems to be a pattern that's developing here. The reveal that Ida's elixir is no longer working is some great setup for the finale, and the reason for the viewer to be interested to see what happens next, which, even at this point in Season 1, is needed a decent amount. But of course, the focus of this episode is on Luz and Willow and Gus, and of course, Albert and the Bat Queen. And our precious owl boy rarely ever gets some focus, so it's really nice at this point to get some lore on what, he actually is. The Palismen are a super fun concept, and the show knows it, which is why they get such a focus in the second and third seasons. However, the majority of this part of the episode is mostly focused on completing Mario Party-esque minigames tasks for the Bat Queen. And all this ends up being is just build up for the genuinely good plot twist that the Bat Queen herself is actually a Palisman. Which, raises a lot of questions about Palismen because apparently they can reproduce, or unless the Bat Queen is a special Palisman, but we're never going to find that out because the Bat Queen's past and mysterious owner are famously one of the only completely unresolved mystery plot points of the entire show. The most common fan theory seems to be the Titan, but no, she would need to be 1,000 times the size. So while the episode isn't necessarily bad, it's just leading up to a revelation just begging to be built upon that never happens. It's a shame. Maybe one day we'll find out in a Gravity Falls or Avatar comic style follow-up. Here's hoping. In Season 1, Episode 3 of The Owl House, Luz is clearly shocked when Ida mentions there is a magic school. However, Ida clearly mentioned the existence of a magic school in the episode before. Boy, I hope someone got fired over that error. I greatly apologise for that, whatever that was. I Was A Teenage Abomination is a lot of fun. It's both a very revisitable episode and one that's a great step up on first watch. With the introduction of Willow and Gus, it's great to see Luz interacting with characters that, how do I put it, aren't trying so hard to be the dry, jaded wit to her unstoppable enthusiasm. And the introduction of the rest of the Hexside squad, by that I mean Amity. Oh dang, this is the first episode in the list with Amity. I mean, I've got a lot of words for Amity, mostly good ones, but now is not the time for them. For now, the most I'll say is that she's especially fun to go back to after the finale, to see her so incredibly infuriated by the human, knowing what happens between these two. Obviously, every good rivals to friends / lovers story needs to start out with a good rivalry, and while Teenage Abomination is, as you can tell, probably the least interesting Amity episode, it was absolutely a necessary starting point. Let's see, what else is there? Ida and King's B-plot really isn't much to write home about besides a couple of funny moments, and the Academy security system, oddly enough, feels like it could be a lead up to Glyphs in the way that it looks, but never gets mentioned again. Willow and Gus shine pretty well as characters in this episode, and the former's problem about being pushed into a track that's less comfortable for you because it has better job opportunities feels pretty relevant to today. Hexside episodes can be very hit or miss, and this one's a fairly solid hit. Before anything else, I just want to say, I feel you, Ida, I feel you. Chicks are not my strong point. No, thank you very much. This episode introduces us to Amity's twin siblings, and while it's not like they're on anyone's top 5 favourite characters, I think, Blightstans let me know, but at the same time, everyone likes them well enough, and the exact same can be said for this episode. It's a good time, but there's nothing about it that sticks out in comparison to so many of the ones above it. I do really like the creativity when it comes to the Demon Realm library, both before but especially after it comes to life. It's a great little sequence, and in a bit of a reverse for an episode with Amity, instead of her getting closer to Luz, it's kind of the other way around, with her and us learning a good bit more about Miss Cotton Candy here. We get some more depth to Amity here, a little scry into what her life is like outside of Hexside, and as it turns out, she can be pretty cool. I can't tell you how glad I am that they don't have Amity immediately start crushing on Luz. It feels so much more natural like this. A slow build. Oh, and there's the Bat Queen, as we already mentioned. She really does like to leave things hanging, doesn't she? This is her second out of 3 major appearances, and every single time she ends up leaving with some kind of hint as for why she's appearing again. Which, this is the only time it gets resolved. I'm sorry, but that's kind of hilarious. All in all, a good little episode, but yeah, there's really not much else to write home about. Yeah, I know, right? A Lumity episode reaching this low. Okay, but really, let me explain. Firstly, the B-plot with King is really just harmless fluff. There's nothing too much to talk about other than the fact that it's funny. Again, take a shot. And I believe, for the first time, Hooty gets more than just a cameo or two in an episode. So, it gets points for that, but that's really about it. Obviously, the meat and potatoes of this episode comes from Luz, Ida, Amity, and the twins. And personally, I find it to be a mixed bag. Training wands are an interesting concept that just never get brought up again. I know, the glyphs, but still. And personally, I think Ida's goofiness is a little dialed up to 11 here, to the point where you do really start to question a little how good of a mentor she actually is. Because yes, she does point Luz in the right direction, but it ends up feeling less like she's a wise, powerful witch, and more like she just got completely lucky. Because she had no idea about the glyphs, okay? She was trying to teach Luz how she would teach a normal witch, which clearly isn't the way to go about things. Who knows, maybe I'm overthinking this. Now, the finale of the episode isn't too much to talk about. It's a fairly forgettable battle against a big roaring monster, but I do think the conclusion of Amity's arc here, is unintentionally hilarious. I can't do magic! Yes, you can! Wait, you're right, yes I can. That being said, there's a reason why the episode is as high as it is. Because of that scene where Luz discovers the ice cliff was already an incredibly stellar scene, but I think the show's ending just boosted it up to one of the best scenes of season 1. The music, the voice acting, the realization of what the future means on your first time around, and the knowledge of the Titan looking down on her on repeat viewings. The scene pretty much carries the episode for me. Well, that and Luz and Amity. They're adorable, okay? They have great chemistry and build up, and it's sweet seeing her really start to care about this human. Praise be the Limity. Full disclosure, this episode used to be a lot lower, like bottom 5 lower. Before I rewatched this series for the video, the most I remembered from this episode was that it was yet another stupid lie reveal plot. And going back to it, oh yes, that is absolutely the lowlight of the episode. It makes even less sense than Gussie's. So, losing the detention squad fall out because her friends call out about the detention track being crap. But the detention track not being crap is supposed to be a massive secret. So what the hell, guys? It's a really forced split, and it does drag the episode down. The good news is, the rest of the episode is actually pretty stellar. In fact, this episode is, stealthily, one of the most important episodes of season 1, I'd argue. Not only do we get Luz rebelling against the Coven system in her own unique way, but we also get the whole idea of shape-shifting basilisks set up, which, you know, is a major player in some of the best episodes in the entire series. And what it has in lore and setup, it equally has in comedy. I have admittedly been ragging on most of King's B-plots so far in this video, and technically his appearance in this episode is no different. It doesn't advance the plot, or the characters, or the world, it's just King goofing around. The difference here is that it's actually pretty goddamn hilarious. I wish I'd been taught by the King of Teachers. You go, man! Wow, okay, we're at number 31 and we're already out of episodes that I'd consider average. This is gonna be a long one. This was apparently the first episode to be made with the knowledge that the show was to be shortened, and it shows, if only at the ending, because Belos and his plans, so shrouded in mystique, needed a good old kick to at least get a little move in motion. Now, I used to have this episode a good amount further down, just because I remembered very little about it. But honestly, I like pretty much all of what Follies has to offer. Kikimora is certainly an interesting choice to centre an episode around, but the fact that not every antagonist is redeemable, even besides Belos, is actually a really nice touch. Because, yeah, some people are just scumbags who will walk all over you no matter how much you try to help them out. Honestly, this just makes me appreciate her character a lot more had she just been another person, witch, demon? Purely manipulated by Belos. Then there's our heroes, and honestly all of them are great here. Ida and Rain? I actually love how upon rewatch, it's pretty clear that Rain isn't being controlled by terror like how we first think. Heck, there's even a little moment of him whistling into the drink to nullify it, like how we find out a few episodes later. That's awesome! Then there's Luz and Amity being adorable, not much else to say there, Hooty being a goddamn riot, and even Willow gets a pretty great scene, being able to casually show how she's no longer the, for lack of better term, pushover she was in most of season 1. There's no massive standout moments, except maybe Luz freaking out over what her mother had said, at least by the standards of season 2, but Follies at the Coven Day Parade is undoubtedly really solid. Good on it. Covention does a lot of good things. It introduces us properly to yet another main aspect of the Owl House's fascinating lore and magic system, the Covens. Like I said, I'm trying my hardest to not use the excuse of the show being shortened for its flaws, but here's a genuine example of that, I think. I would really have loved to see the intricacies of these and the Coven heads expanded upon in more detail, but there just wasn't time for that. What we also get is Lilith, who makes for both by far the episode's highlight, as well as the strangest low point in the grand scheme of things. Let me explain. Highlight should be obvious, her battle with Ida is absolutely spectacular, and the first proper showcase of just how incredible the animation for the Owl House can be. And the low point, well, she's the mentor of Amity, which is fine in the vacuum of this episode, but like, never gets expanded upon? At all? Why was this even included? Why was this a thing? Speaking of whom, it's great to see Amity and Luz's relationship start to blossom as she gains respect for the human. Enemies to friends / lovers does feel dime a dozen these days in terms of animation, but this one is done really well, even in the early days, and was honestly the main thing keeping me invested throughout season 1. Besides certain specific episodes, but we'll get there. Eventually. This, or maybe the last episode, 50/50, is probably the tier where episodes go from good, because yes, I wouldn't say there's a single bad episode in the Owl House, to really good. Speaking of which, Wing It Like Witches. Well, it's less here because of what it is as a whole, and more because of the sum of its parts. What I mean by that is, the episode as a whole is really nothing to write home about. It's just a big sporting match against a pretty typical bully character, and Ida and Lilith having one last confrontation before things get serious, in a way that really does not feel like one last confrontation before things get serious. However, what makes this episode stand out is its moments. Like, we'll discuss it more in a moment, but understanding Willow is where I feel the show finally found its stride when it comes to writing. And just 2 episodes later, that really shows here. Because this episode is, like, really freaking funny. Gus has some great lines, the whole montage bits, the call out to Harry Potter, and so much more. But, of course, the episode's highlight beyond a shadow of a doubt is Gay Panic Amity. I was not around for it when the episode was first out, but I can only imagine the absolute cataclysm that this must have brought to the fanbase, in a good way I mean. Like, there's a reason these lines are some of the most famous in the show 2 seasons later. Like I said, its parts are better than its whole, but I can't argue any more than that about Wing It Like Witches. Ah, the knee pats of Gay Panic. Wonderful stuff. Escaping Expulsion is a strange episode to me, because, well, I should love it. I should like it way more than I do, which, I mean, it's not like I dislike it, not at all. I think it's a dang solid episode, but for some reason I just can't get myself too hyped about it. Now, like I said, there's some really great stuff in here. We finally get some reciprocation from the Lou side of Lumity. Took you long enough, you oblivious little scrunkle. And of course, this episode has some really necessary world building for the second half of the show, with the Abomination mechs popping up decently often. But going back to Amity and Luz for a second, the episode's highlight is of course the battle with the new Abomatron. It's emotional, it's awesome, it's sweet, and it's very funny when it wants to be. It's the reason this episode is remembered, and no wonder. However, my second favourite part of the episode has to be the Ida and Lilith section. There's the comedic side of it of course, which is very good, but honestly, it's more the glyph system itself that really caught my attention. For a show about magic, we really went a whole season without a proper magic system, but the glyphs and how they work and why they work add a whole new dimension to the battles, and I love it. Now there are some lowlights. Odalia is a very one-dimensional character, and only really interesting at all as a foil to Amity, especially when the stakes are lower. And Willow and Gus are written out by being grabbed by basic abominations, like, come on, they could take these guys out with ease a season ago. It's a good episode, a really good episode, but I'm afraid to say, it just doesn't grab me like those above it. Go figure. To best sum up my thoughts on the Owl House Season 3, I believe this image should be the best visual indicator I can manage. Yeah, that's about right. Now, of course, I don't think this episode is a bad one. It could be much further down, Is it a little disappointing that it doesn't nearly measure up to the other two installments of Season 3? Yes, but it does have its strengths. Take the first few minutes. The intro is probably one of my favourite scenes of the entire show. In large part because, oh my god, they did not need to go so hard with the score in this moment. The Collector showing off more of his power in ways equally terrifying, okay, maybe terrifying isn't the right word, and hilarious ways. Rain's reaction to Ida, the animation, the mysterious setup afterwards, stellar stuff. And throughout the entire episode, our main heroes are actually treated really well in terms of their characters. The Hex Squad has been beaten down and you can see that all of them are weary and tired. Despite the overly childish imagery throughout, the downtrodden attitudes of our cast really help solidify the episode as being one of the entries in the show's big climax. Luz I will get to in a moment. It's really interesting to see King have to take the voice of reason for a more childish figure for once. Amity and Gus are just really solid. Willow is, after shouldering the burden of the team for so long, is finally able to release her emotions, and Hunter, oh my god, is this the first episode here with Hunter in it? How many episodes have we gone through so far, like 20? I guess he's just that basic character. I guess we do have our Huntlow confirmation, which, I mean, I was rather happy with, but I think I'll save that talk for another episode because there is so much to talk about here. For example, now seems as good a time as any to talk about the enigma that is the Collector. I've mentioned before this, I'm afraid I'm still going to stick with it, the Collector's shift to being goofy and completely oblivious to the damage he causes, while being an interesting character concept, does not line up with the character we've seen throughout the last season. I'm not even talking about the Shadow Collector, I'm talking about the Collector we see about 5 minutes before the events of For the Future's opening. Okay, now, if we're talking about characters staying consistent, we have to talk about Luz. In a good way, in a very good way. Just not for her. All of her anxieties and inner turmoil is still at the forefront of her character, and her talk with her mother is a really beautiful part of the episodes. And we finally see how the guilt and shame and despair that's been building within Luz since halfway through season 2 being released. It's a super cathartic moment that makes a lot of sense. You can go through all the fantasy adventures you like, but if you think your mother hates you for it, you'll never be the same. But more on that later. It's a treat to finally see Camila in the Boiling Isles, and I'm really happy they don't speedrun the generic fish out of water shenanigans. And her mirroring Luz's first encounters is a really nice touch. All this said, you might be wondering why this episode isn't higher. No, you probably aren't, let's be honest, you know exactly why. It's because of the second half. I'm sorry, I'm sure they have their fans, but when you are ridiculously squeezed for time in your big 3-part finale, why spend a huge amount of time in one of those 3 parts focused on characters like Boscha, Kikimora and Matholomew? It would be like if one of the Avatar finale parts suddenly decided to spend most of its episode building on the characters of Sparky Boom Man and Judy, not for them to contribute to the final battle in any way, of course. The Hexside section half of the episode, give or take, I'm sorry, just feels like a more nonsensical knockoff of Weird Mageddon. What with the post-apocalyptic take on characters being hunted by flying monsters and being taken to a castle in the sky, it's way too little, way too late to add anything to Boscha. Matt was always just an okay character to me, and I probably like Kikimora more than most, but she really isn't relevant anymore. A destroyed Hexside and seeing what Kiki's up to aren't bad ideas, but when they take up half the episode's runtime, yeah, it really feels like the writers are just trying to keep our characters from Belos and the Collector for as long as possible. For the Future is a very mixed bag. But the highlights are so stinking high that they single-handedly keep For the Future anywhere near lower than the middle of the list. And now we go from the future to the past. Look, truth be told, I've never been a big one for prequels. Unless they stand on their own as a complete story, as a setup mystery beforehand, or they are completely required to see for what is currently happening or what is going to happen in a story. I'd much rather focus on the present or future of a story than its past, you know? Before we get to that, we actually get a really awesome little scene of Luz experimenting with glyphs, showing her learning abilities that Belos has, either in the past or the future, shown off. I wish we got more of this kind of thing, but I can understand being strapped for time. It's much easier to just put it at the start of the episode like this. Yeah, fair. Anyway, really awesome setup for Belos' reveal. Now, enough just recapping the episode, let's talk. Young Ida is just as much of a riot as older Ida, and her and Rain have some excellent chemistry throughout. I would honestly argue they have better chemistry than their older counterparts for the most part. Maybe that's just a side effect of them being young and therefore brighter and more energetic, and a whole lot of their scenes together in the present day of the show are, how best to put it, very angst-filled. But let's not jump ahead, we'll get there when we get there. The relationship between Ida and Rain is absolutely what carries the majority of the episodes. Lilith actually features shockingly little for what I would have expected in a young Ida episode, and while it's really nice to see a younger Bump, he ends up adding about as much to this story as he does the rest of the show. Just being a cool character, what can I say? And as for the rest of the younger cast, young Darius, Alador, Odalia, Willow's parents, I could honestly take or leave them. It's not like they do anything or even say anything, so it's just kind of window dressing. And unless they're really pushing for a young Ida spin-off, I guess it makes the world feel smaller that all these characters went to school together, you know? Now, someone that's brand new, Principal Faust is absolute gold. Both in a less serious sense, his absolute despising of children is truly commendable, I must say, and a more genuine serious sense, because you can now see where Ida's complete hatred of the school system will have came from. A good teacher can make all the difference in the world to a kid's development, and someone like Ida being stuck with the worst of them all? Yeah, that would definitely develop into the woman we see today. Then there's the important part, the ending, which basically just showcases the big climax of Season 2 in a blink and you'll miss it sheet of paper, and confirms that Rain is still part of the rebellion, as well as a hint towards Alador, which, I feel like I'm saying this a lot, but, well, we'll talk about that later. Good episodes, but I feel like something flashback focused should have been a lot earlier in the season, personally. Willow's an interesting character, and I like that character a good amount. She's probably one of my favourites in the whole show. But when I'm asked why, my answer generally tends to be along the lines of, I just think she's neat. This episode though, it's taken a long while to get a dive into who she is, like 3/4 of the way through Season 1, but it's a great first impression. And with some Beta Lumity along for the ride, who can say no? This is going to sound strange to say, but until the season finale, understanding Willow has the best stakes of any Owl House episode so far. Which might sound strange to say, because our characters have been threatened with death, life in prison, slavery, and whatever the hell was going on with the old ladies in Once Upon a Swap. But obviously, when it comes to things like our characters' many close encounters with death, we know quite well they're going to make it out of this perfectly fine. Partly because it's an animated show on Disney, and because of the way the characters react. However, Willow losing her memories? There's no bodily harm involved. This is very different, and arguably even more terrifying. At least for a while, it's taken genuinely seriously by pretty much everyone involved, even Ida, slightly. Willow's mind is an incredible set piece, not because it goes all in on being grand and theatrical like I assume would be the usual case nowadays. It's actually surprisingly simple. The technical aspects are set up really well, and it's fascinating to imagine what other characters' minds are like. Then allows for the emotion to hit you hard by the second half. It's really great that they weren't immediately friends by the end. One good action just doesn't undo years of bad ones, especially when that good action only happened because of something bad the character was doing, and it's great that the show knows that. Oh, right, yeah, and I guess Gus is doing interviews or something. Yeah, I'll be honest, he honestly drags down the episode because Willow is set up to be his best friend from the start, and vice versa. And here he gets relegated to the comedy act when she's in mortal peril. The show's comedy feels a lot more natural once we get to season 2, and I'm glad it does, because this is not it. But hey, it also is major setup for one of the best episodes in the entire show, so I can't argue too hard with that. Oh god, like I said, I feel bad for Gus in this series, in a meta sense, I mean, because now we have reached the second episode where he has given essentially the main character role, the A-plot, and the B-plot is a friggin' Lumity kiss, so it's just a little overshadowed, you know? Okay. At the very least, you know, it's not a lie reveal episode again. Wait, no. Oh my god, it's a lie reveal episode again! No! Oh, Gus, you poor bastards. Okay. Let's actually talk about that quote-unquote B-plot first, shall we? Considering their next episode together they finally talk things out, this is the last full will they won't they blushy blushy episode, and the writers know it. So, you know, they take the relationship between these two and dial it up to 11, and it's absolutely adorable. By the end, it's also incredibly emotional seeing these two confused and unsure about themselves and each other, and when they do finally talk to each other like this, it feels completely earned from everything they've gone through together, and how Amity has changed. But more on that later. And they're even giving the ending of the episode with the introduction of the Echo Mouse. I love the design of this thing, the perfect combination of creepy and cute. Philip's journal, which, oh, we'll have plenty to talk about there. And, oh, something I must be forgetting something, Yeah, this was, how do I put it, Then there's the main storyline with Gus, which is mixed. Him finally letting loose and showing off what illusions can do is a pretty terrifying, pretty amazing, pretty fucked up, pretty sick sequence. But other than that, well, the Glandis kids are one-off and one-dimensional. The Illusionist Guardian has a good amount of potential but never shows up again beyond a one-off gag. And of course, for the second of 2 times that Gus is the focus of an episode, he's once again hiding behind a big secret that of course will be revealed by the end. Like, it's not bad, but it's not very good either, and ends up completely overshadowed by the much more interesting, much more emotional Lumity. F in the chats. I'm not going to lie, this is the spot where the episodes really started to become difficult to rank. These next few I was mixing and switching their positions for days on end, just in case one of your favourites comes up next. First of all, the cold open with Bellows and the Collector is a very hype scene. We don't get to see many interactions between these two, and this one, short as it is, does a great job of setting the stage for the big Season 2 finale. The first half of the episode as a whole is easily where its strengths lie. The Resistance meeting is very well done, and Ida being forced to get a Coven sigil for the plan to work, despite, you know, the fact that she can't really use magic anymore, is still a very poignant moment for her character, even if the plan itself is, interesting. Because from what we've seen, what the characters have seen, despite what they try to tell us, no, Ida's curse doesn't warp magic, it corrupts it, it makes it deadly. Like, the fact is, it was likely going to kill everyone caught in the effects in Ida's Requiem, more on that soon, was a big deal, that was a big deal. But that's not a deal breaker. And for what it's worth, I love the plan of the draining spell because it gives a genuine, clever way for our teenage cast to be as important as they are. Because, obviously, they're not affected. That's cool. Now, okay, I've put it off long enough. Let's talk about the reason literally everyone remembers this episode, shall we? It's not the emotional semi-goodbye talk between our main trio, it's not the reunion between Luz and the Hexhead squad now featuring Hunter TM, and it's most definitely not the battle with Kikimora and Odalia. No, it's this chunk of Lumity. So hey, now's a good time to talk about the lead up to this kiss, eh? Back when it was first becoming clear that these two were going to get together, and by clear I mean I thought Lumity was the name of the character in the show because of how much I'd heard about it before watching, me and my friend who was watching the show separately were kind of concerned that this was going to be a big ol' rivals falling for each other instantly kind of thing. Since we knew this wasn't going to be a big will they won't they situation that tends to be stretched out throughout the entire show. But no, they're not even together at the end of the first season. And despite a gargantuan amount of relationship stuff, they don't even get a full-on kiss until the end of season 2. Lumity is a great example of the best of both worlds in relationship writing, and showing just the right amount of restraint, and actually letting your characters be together. It's great stuff. All this to say, Clouds on the Horizon is a great episode even outside the Lumity stuff. There's the aforementioned first chunk, and even though I brushed past the fight with Kikimora, that has some great aspects to it. The twist and plan with Luz and Hunter, something that's really obvious in retrospect, but it catches people off guard really well pretty much every time, the best kind of twists. And Gus doing the overpowered illusionist thing and just trapping Kikimora in complete darkness. And people say the animation in this episode is jank? Really? Outside of this little part, which I will defend till I die, I love it, I don't see why. And Willow about to beat down Kikimora remains one of my favourite pieces of animation in the entire show. I mentioned earlier that Odalia isn't particularly interesting when the stakes are lower, and the reverse is true. When the stakes are so high, her sheer arrogance and controlling nature become way more interesting and way more threatening just because of how self-destructive they are. It's realistic and interesting to see just how far people will go for good business. Whew, these are getting longer and longer, huh? This might take a while. Alright, before anything else, I just have to emphasise that our first time meeting Hunter is pretty much shown that he was just scranning cereal in the dark during the journey, and I think that's just fucking brilliant Chad behaviour. Now, Separate Tides is an episode that's really tricky to place in the ranking, because there's a good amount of really good stuff in it, and stuff that just gets thrown to the wayside. By that, I mean, we spend half the episode with Hooty and Lilith, and it is not a bad time. Somehow, they take these two characters, who by this point in the show are probably around C tier for most people, and have them work off each other stupidly well. I really don't know how they did it. Lilith's flippant and maybe just a little pathetic, friendless self works wonders with Hooty's bizarre, manically upbeat demeanour, and the two bounce off each other with just the right shades of weirds. So it's not the characters I have a problem with, but rather what it is they're doing. See, they spend the entire episode breaking their backs, creating a potion that apparently allows them to see inside the Emperor's castle, wherever and whenever they like. I assume you understand just how stupidly broken that idea is, and it's pretty clear the writers did too, because it is never mentioned again. The new portal being built, the Collector, Belos' curse, and everything else that goes on in there. The Owl House gang should know exactly what's happening, and I guess they just never look. Even the quickest of throwaway lines over the next few episodes about how anti-scrying defences have been put up around the castle would have been absolutely fine, but it's just never addressed. Go figure. The rest of the episode though, is pretty great. Confident Golden Card Hunter is a riot, and it's a shame we only really got like one more scene of him, which that wasn't even a thing because of the shortening. Not much else to say here, just a really fun character for now. Luz and Ida are definitely having less fun, and I really appreciate how they're both handled in this episode. In Ida's case, we've gotten to see her serious side before the finale, but here's where the two sides of her character are made very clear. Her carefree, cocky, jokester personality that's showcased with Lilith, and her more genuine side with Luz. Her talk with the kid is so heartfelt, you really understand how much of an impact these two have had on each other. Oh, and she's absolutely rocking that pirate fit, no wonder it makes a return for the epilogue. Then there's Luz. While she doesn't rock the same Me Hearties fit as much as her mentor, she's done even better in the character department. This is where we see her guilt twisting and manifesting into a spiral of self-loathing for the first, but most certainly not the last, time. Separate Tides does an excellent job establishing the new status quo, both for our character situations, but also for their mental state, something that really important for what's to come. Good stuff. Honestly, I feel really bad not putting this any higher. For the fans of this episode, see it more like every episode above this being so utterly fantastic, rather than Labyrinth Runners being anywhere close to bad. Or even mediocre. Or even just good. Because this is a great episode. Adrian is a fun addition to the cast, his eccentric James Cameron-esque personality fitting in perfectly with the rest of the Emperor's Coven. Obviously there's not much depth to speak about, but the reactions of the scouts underneath him are some of my favourite reactions of the scouts in the series, and I love the scouts. But of course, there's so much more to talk about in this episode. Amity, Willow, Hunter, and Gus, my boy, look at you go! 3rd time's the charm! An episode focused on you without the lie reveal plot in sight! But yeah, in all seriousness, this is the best outing Gus gets throughout the entire series, easily. The over-the-top bullying and more childish insults being in his head is a really clever writing trick, and I'm glad we finally get to see some expansion on the fact that he was moved upgrades. And the connection that he builds with Hunter? Up till now, Gus was just an okay character to me, and this episode single-handedly propelled him up much closer with the rest of the main cast. Speaking of Hunter, well, I'll talk about why he's one of my favourite characters soon, but in this episode specifically, he's low. It's debatable whether he was at a lower point here or in For the Future, but either way, he continues to be the best written character in the show. Not in terms of quality, not necessarily, maybe, but in consistency. There's no worrying about getting an interview for a school project when your best friend might be brain dead forever incidents. There's clearly so much care in his character's actions. For example, him immediately going for an authority figure when trying to help Gus. Rock solid stuff all round. And oh my god, I think the moment where Illusion Bellows turned the corner all of a sudden is probably the highest my heart rate has gone in this show. That's some amazing showcase of what illusions can do. And then there's Willow and Amity. Ever since understanding Willow, they've had an awkward relationship, which isn't a bad thing. It makes complete sense for both characters. But I think a full season later, now's a good time to wrap this up, and I think it's a shame we didn't get that much of this duo. But what we have here is some nice character building. This episode isn't without its issues though. Like, I feel like Gussie's almost supernatural level of raw magical power just doesn't really come to play at all after this, let alone an explanation of it. Like, he's just a normal ass witch from this point on. Take Willow as an example. She's also shown to be a prodigy, and you're able to clearly see in many episodes across the series, especially in season 2, that that's the case. But when Gus is in combat afterwards, it feels like he could just be any other illusionist. It's admittedly going to be rather difficult to showcase illusion magic as being that notably powerful in comparison to just plants, but this episode seems to do that just fine. And after this, he even has that handy dandy magic amplifier, which might as well not even exist after it's introduced. I suppose he looks through Bellows' memories with it, but that has a range of its own issues and I'll address them in due time. All in all, great episode though. Okay, well, I might be a little lynched for having this one so high, but it's my list, damn it, and I'm a big fan of any support in the storm. Now I can admit, there's things it does that I really wish were expanded upon further in the show. Like, come on, you can't just set up Darius as having known a previous Golden Guard, and then just never talk about it. I do really like how in the end of the episode it keeps you guessing about the guy, but come on, there's so much potential here. Whatever. It's another Owl House character that could carry a spin-off episode on their own. Take a shot. Let's talk about the bulk of the episode though, Hunter and Willow. The former? I have no idea why it took this long, because he's one of my favourite characters now, but this was the episode where I really started to care about Hunter. His attempts to connect with fellow teenagers is fucking hilarious, of course, even if there is some quite a sad undertone if you think about it, and they don't try and sugarcoat the brainwashed grown-up in what's basically a cult aspect of his character. I really love how they never even go close to the typical cliche of this story. As in, he trains and wins with his teammates, he slowly starts to gain a connection, starting to doubt his devotion to the Emperor's Coven. No, none of that. Up until this episode's climax, until he directly sees just how utterly devastating this is for all of them, and with just a little nudge from best character Steve, does he take action. This really strengthens his character for the better, making him feel significantly more layered. Zuko will be proud. Then you throw in Willow and the relationship the two of them have. Look, I'm not much of a shipper, so I don't know what digital toxin this show is coated in to make me care so much about so many of them. Still, interacting with someone who actually treats Hunter with something besides manipulation or hostility, however errant that hostility is, allows for a great new dynamic, and while I think the whole half-witch thing might be a little on the nose, I think it works. They're both strong characters who try to be stronger on their own without any help, to the point where it's detrimental. And here they find someone who they can connect with. And hey, it even borrows some of the best aspects of Lumity, like not trying to rush it. It takes its time and it feels perfectly natural by the time we get there. Speaking of which, there's Luz and Amity here too, who just kind of spend the episode being adorable. There's not really too much else to say here. I mean, they don't really get to do a lot of normal stuff together, so this is nice to see. I also think it's fun that the crew gets to call out some of the fan theories in ways that doesn't feel disingenuous in the slightest. From this, it seems like the fans are actually held in a really high regard, and it's a really nice feeling to have in the show. Objectively, Any Sport is probably not as great an episode as some below it, I can admit. But it's one that I have a soft spot for, and it's my list, so here's where it ranks. Now, onward! Okay, so this is where things start getting real in the show, because they start not even having the time to show you the intro anymore, and I love it. Now, onto the episode itself, and before anything else, oh thank God, it's a closed loop. I don't think I need to tell you what kind of shit fuckery we would be dealing with if they introduced unlimited time travel this late in the game. But no, they make it clear from the start that we're operating on everything you do already happened logic, so we're in the clear. Outside of timey-wimey stuff, we also get Ida reconnecting with her father, a character who easily has the highest screen time to high rating ratio in my personal character list, just because every time he shows up is a top tier scene. And here's no different. His reunion with Ida is emotional as heck, with the animation and voice performance working wonders to get such an important character across so quickly. And Ida's self-loathing is so heartbreaking and sadly understandable. Now, here we get some base-stamped Lilith. It's really nice having seen her slowly but surely grow back into her own person after leaving the Emperor's Coven. Season 1 Lilith was by no means a bad character, but Season 2 is where she's really allowed to shine. It makes complete sense why she left when she did, but I still wish she could have been a permanent main character, as does pretty much everyone I think. Hey, at least we have some episodes like this, and I honestly think she has an underrated dynamic with Luz. Like, these two are the nerds with a capital N of the group, and with nothing to hold them back, their nerdiness is truly unstoppable. However, the highlight of this episode is probably Philip, and after so long seeing the shadows of his memories, he is absolutely perfect, but not in the way you might expect. As Philip would have been, he's just a decent enough character, bit of a dick. But, as a past version of Emperor Belos, he's perfect. On rewatch you're able to see all the manipulation and conniving for what they are. Some obvious and some surprisingly subtle. The Owl House team clearly had a great time making the mannerisms of this asshole. It's really cool stuff. And that ending, oh my god, that ending! The music when the Collector is shown, the freaky animation of whatever the hell is going on with his arm, the Palismen, and of course his actual words, "I just need to live long enough to see this through," is all harrowing. I'm gonna be entirely honest. Back when I was first binging this show, somehow, I didn't realise the Philip Bells connection until now, so this was a real shocker for me. But I'll talk more about that in Hollow Mind. For now! Hunting Palisman. The episode that's remembered for introducing us to Hunter and literally nothing else. But honestly, there's so much more this episode has to offer. For example, it's kind of awesome that they just kind of straight up show Bellis' monster form like half a season before Hollow Mind. In fact, the whole cold open is just fantastic. Meeting the Coven heads, the vision shown to them that I do wish meant a little more in the grand scheme of things, but is still very cool, and showing off Bellis' curse. The animation and sound department team go kinda nuts here. It's really violent and evocative of just what happened to his form. It's like someone vomiting. It's great stuff. Then there's Luz, who, to me, might actually be at her most relatable during this episode. Yes, of all episodes. Not knowing what you want your future to be, heck, maybe having plans that are completely contradictory to each other. Oh yeah, those are terrifying feelings, and it's very neatly reflected by Hunter now starting to question his future, ever so slightly. Speaking of whom, for his first unmasked episode, he needed to make an impression, and oh boy, he certainly does. For the entire episode, him and Luz have a brilliant sibling-esque rivalry back and forth that puts out banger moment after banger moment whenever they're on screen. I do miss this frenemies vibe they had, but they're just as good as friends, so no complaints here. I mean, look, I love his little dash move and I love Flapjack, but I think the mechanical staff is awesome, even if, similar with Ida, it needed removing because of just how potentially endless the possibilities are. And speaking of Ida, she's not in this episode much, but when she is, she has possibly some of my favourite moments of both her and King, both because of the hilarious delivery of
"We could have used the door!"
but also because of the tenderness of this scene, of having an adult care for you and your well-being again, contrasted heavily with Hunter at the end of the episode. Flapjack, my brother, we shall speak about you soon. Another thing this episode does really, really well, maybe I just happened to hear it more at this specific time, but the team working on the music went particularly hard this episode, and it's so theatrical and exciting. I love it. Props to Brad Breek. This is one strange episode. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean bad, as you can tell from it being so high, but definitely strange. Before we get into everything with King, the start of the episode is actually excellent. Pretty much every time we see Ida's cheeky, jovial personality slip is a great scene, and the whole thing seems shockingly mature, both in terms of Luz's reaction, as well as Ida's want to keep her safe and not have her involved at all, because, well, she is just a kid. And it's surprisingly rare that we get to see the sisters comfort each other like this too, a really quality start to the episodes. And then there's the Titan Trappers, which, oh man, I'm really not sure what to do with them. On one hand, they do seem interesting and make for a pretty great revelation to King's ancestry. It's a plot twist that's been built up for a while now, and I must admit, during my binge of the show, this caught me completely off guard. One of the big three twists, Lilith, Bellos and King, this is probably my favourite, but I still love the other two, and we'll get there in a moment. But yeah, the Titan Trappers themselves are just okay. They make for decent antagonists, but the issues come with the fact that they just disappear here and never show up again, despite having the closest ties to the spotlight-stealing antagonist of Season 2's finale. And the Collector really doesn't seem like the type to have a bloodthirsty cult-killing baby titans. And it's not like he doesn't know they exist, as shown by the finale, it just seems like they don't fit together, which I suppose almost works with the whole, other side of the world thing. But I don't know, feels like they could have had more of an impact. But then again, this episode's focus isn't really them, it's King. And in that sense, oh my god, it's horrifying and incredible. His desperation hits a peak here, and it's very bittersweet on a second watch, seeing him have the time of his life with the Trappers. But the emotional meat and potatoes comes from his utterly shattering heartbreak at the end. Because first, oh my god, and then we get to play catch as top 3 darkest moments in the show easy. And second, his talk with Luz about how he knows he'll leave him one day, and her expression during that. And third, well, the fact that he's a Titan, which gets a lot more focus on the episode afterwards, but even this simple moment of Hi. Good God, Alex Hirsch is a masterful voice actor. That one word can make you choke up. This episode might have just my favourite piece of promotional artwork of the entire series. Whether you've already seen it or not, it seems so dreamlike and tranquil, with just the slightest hint of menace because of how perfect the scene is for King. I mean, it's not part of the episode, so not sure how much of it should bump it up, but it's good stuff. The season 1 finale seems to be, oddly enough, underrated. Maybe it's different on rewatch, but the main problem that people seem to have with it, that being, from what I can tell, is having far too breakneck a pace. Again, could just be because it's a rewatch, but I just don't see it. Instead of too much crammed in, I just say there's a lot of quality to love here. We finally get some history on the Isles and Belos. I'm shocked it took this long, but I'll take it. What's also been a long time coming is Luz being a little badass, and the glyphs have been built up to be super powerful in their own way, but this is the first time we've seen them in proper combat use, so it's great. But much more important than that, the relationship between Luz and Ida. Seeing how much the familial love between the human and the owl lady has flourished, it's a long time coming seeing them finally confront the mortality of that relationship. And it really gets you emotional seeing Ida resign herself to her fate. Not as much as other moments of what is basically a two-parter finale, but we'll get there in a mo. Then you have Belos himself. This isn't him at his best, but it's him at his most threatening and mysterious. I actually wish we got more of this force of nature, masked devil type emperor, but it's probably a grass is greener on the other side thing. But his mannerisms, his magic, his drip, his presence is so eldritch in this episode, and nothing that comes afterwards quite compares. Even if that is the point, and I just have to shout out his vocal performance. All the voice actors bring their A-game, especially in the season finale onwards, but Matthew Rice is just wonderfully chilling in this episode.
Okay. I'll play. TikTok human, the owl lady doesn't have much time left.
One major gripe though, he didn't take Ida's Palisman for himself. I'm sorry, that's just completely out of character and a real sticking point of ridiculousness in an otherwise pretty grand episode. Now, it's close, but this next point is probably my favourite part of the whole thing. And it's something that really needed to happen, especially with the more story-focused and serious tone that the rest of the show takes. Ida permanently losing her magic. Throughout season 1, the show has to constantly go out of her way to make sure that Ida is either powerless, isn't there, or just being a bit of an idiot when things go wrong. Because, well, she's, quote, the most powerful witch on the Boiling Isles, and with no clear restrictions on what she can or can't do, it's not really something that could have continued if the crew wanted a more complex plotline. So this little stroke of genius works wonders for the future of the show. Speaking of which, that's what I think Youngblood Old Souls does extremely well. Not in just being a good climax to everything that's come before, notice how many times I've said something is a long time coming, but also for setting up the second season. Ida's loss of magical power, the mystery of Belos and his plan, the Golden Guard, and, of course, Luz losing her way to the human realm. From the start, I've talked about how the show struggles to get a good hook for the audience to keep watching, and at the start, a weaker point of that aspect was the fact that our character was so safe. She could go home whenever she wants, even nip between the demon and human realms if she so desired, which just isn't as interesting. The season 1 finale fixes that tenfold by not only trapping her on the Boiling Isles, but also making it a race against Emperor Belos to get back home. I think everyone can agree that season 2 is a far stronger season of television, but that wouldn't be quite possible without the excellent end, excellent beginning that is Youngblood Old Souls. I've seen the Owl House fans call season 2A the peak of the show, and I can't say I don't see it. It does not miss. There is not a single bad, even average, even just good episodes. Episodes 1 and 2 are really good, but I think episode 3, Echoes of the Past, is where the show sprints into peak and just doesn't stop for a long while. Admittedly, it's a little strange that we're just now finally getting back to talking about King and his strange past after a whole season, but it does make a good amount of sense with the characters, especially Lilith, being a newer face in the house that's a lot less likely to play along with any supposed games. But enough about King, what about Hooty? Woo! Best character, been on the sidelines for far too long, finally gets his dues, masterpiece of an episode, baby! But seriously, okay, the first instance of Porta Hooty is one of my singular favourite gags in the entire show. The horrific sounds and reactions, and then this adorable little owl face house, I love it, 10 out of 10. Alright, enough stalling, let's actually talk about King here, shall we? For the entirety of Season 1, the little guy was pretty much just the comic relief, and that was it. Even in the finale episodes, he was more or less sidelined for a serious focus on losing Ida and Lilith. He's there to be funny and adorable, and, you know, he does that well, but Echoes from the Past is the very first episode to take his character seriously. Except for really small problems, but I don't know if we're ready for that conversation. I'm also not ready for King's breakdown whenever I watch this episode, oh my god! Easily the highlight here is seeing the boy's past, and his understandable meltdown over the fact that, you know, his entire life story is a delusion. I'm sure there's some kind of thematic relevance about the manipulation of children or storytelling that you can find, but the emotion here is in the scene itself. The dialogue, the animation, and the stellar voice acting is more than enough to make you care so much. This episode single-handedly pushed King from a decent character to top 5 at the time, and that's not even talking about the really excellent mystery that's set up. Great episodes! However, you know me by this point, and I do feel I have to dock points from episodes when they set up cool ideas and features, and then nothing ever happens with them. What was the deal with these creatures? It feels like they were really supposed to have way more importance than they did, or at least come back in some capacity. They feel so alien even compared to everything else in the demon realm. Even a little cameo in Watching and Dreaming's epilogue would have sufficed. Oh well, still a great episode. Before anything else, to anyone who's rewatched it recently, does this episode have some strange animation and art style choices? Like, it's by no means bad, and I mean more like the characters seeming strangely off-model. I don't know, go figure. In any case, boy, look at this! A non-finale Season 1 episode in the top 25. Trust me, these are rare enough that they're cause for celebration each time. And The Intruder is absolutely worthy of being this high. Because, well, it's the episode that got me watching the show. Episode 1 and 2 are fine, but you can tell by their placement on this list they aren't exactly the greatest beginnings. Episode 3 is a step up, and sets up a few new characters and ideas, but by this point the show still doesn't really have a good hook. Like, a reason to keep watching, you know? I mentioned it in my video comparing the pilots, quote-unquote pilots, of Amphibia and the Owl House, but even after the next couple of episodes, back when I first watched the show, I was watching it mainly because Luz and Ida were fun characters. I didn't really have a desire to continue it beyond, well, the fact that I heard that it was really good. The Intruder changes everything. First, let's talk about the scene where Luz discovers the first glyph of the show. I admit, on first watch I didn't think much of it. I mean, hey, it's kinda clunky to have it just happen to show up on a glitch on our phone, so nah. But with what we know after the big finale on rewatch, this scene actually becomes rather fantastic. It goes from a girl being able to perform magic for the first time, to that and big ol' Titan Dad gifting her for the first time. Her expressions, the music, is all chilling in a very good way. The plot with King and Luz is pretty good overall. It's very sweet to see them start to connect, and to get just a hint about King's inner turmoil about being overlooked and ignored. And hey, even Hooty gets some great moments from this episode. However, it's definitely not about them, it's about Ida and her curse. And the Owl Beast has done wonders in this episode, with the boiling rains outside is by far the most threatened the characters feel throughout most of Season 1. Like, Take out the jokes, and this scenario could be a straight up horror. I love it. Though as mentioned, the best part is that it's what got me interested in watching the rest of the show, at a time where it was nowhere near its peaks. And that comes from the ending. A mystery, a genuine, intriguing mystery about who placed the curse on the Owl Lady. We'll get to its resolution soon, but it was finally something for me to grasp to. The show had its vending machine, it had its calamity box, and as I found, it had so much more. Apparently this isn't a very popular episode across the fandom, from what I can tell. Maybe I'm just looking in the wrong places, or maybe I just have a very unpopular opinion, or maybe I'm just stupid. That could really be a factor. Keeping Up A-Fear-Ances is amazing. Gwendolyn is a great character that lasts long enough to leave an impact, but doesn't overstay her welcome. Through her, you start to see just why Ida, and especially Lilith, grew up to become the way they did. One sister fiercely independent and rebellious, the other desperately seeking love and respect from any of her peers. Speaking of Lilith, despite the fact that her big turning point was earlier, this might just be the best episode for her character-wise. Her experience in the curse that she's brought on her own sister, and the big ol' mummy issues for both of them, help to give the viewer this great and bizarre experience of, most likely, hating her, then liking her, then loving her, and then she's leaving? I know Hooty wasn't the only one torn up about that. But despite all that, and despite some great moments from Luz and King about their own parental issues, honestly, this is one of the few times before yesterday's live that you really feel Luz's homesickness. This is an Ida episode, through and through. It's where the best parts of the episode come from, namely her accepting the curse as part of her, and also the lesser parts, yeah. Like, come on. I know not everything has to be explained. Some things can remain a mystery and lore, and that's absolutely fine. But the portal door? The thing that brought Luz to the Demon Realm in the first place? The main reason behind the events of the Season 1 finale and arguably Season 2? The story begins and ends at Ida found it buried in a random graveyard? Come on, it's a less bright spot in a very bright episode. And speaking of which, let's talk about the reveals. Luz not the only human that's ever been in the Boiling Isles? I mean, it looks like pretty much everyone guessed it was Belos at the time, except me. But it's such an intriguing little note to continue the season on, and the first domino in the Philip/Belos/Luz arc that's one of the show's major highlights. And despite all that, well, you wouldn't know it, all of that wasn't what seemed to be driving the community absolutely wild when the episode first released. No, it's the very end of the episode that managed to do that. The little tease of creepy Luz is some properly spooky stuff. And as much as I love the little basilisk we ended up with, I can't lie, some part of me still loves the idea of some kind of evil Luz copy. I'm sure there's plenty of fanfic out there to help me through that though. This was, for some reason, the singular hardest episode to write a script for. Go figure on that one. Firstly, I'm a really big fan of the B-plot with Luz and King. It does exactly what it's here to do, it doesn't try and overstay its welcome with a training montage or rival or anything, and even then it manages to stay subversive and interesting by keeping Ida involved at the end with them losing. People talk about Mary Sue's and such a lot these days, and this is just one of the many, many examples across the Owl House as to why there's nothing even close to that across all our characters. They're all riddled with failures and with problems, some mental, some physical, some both. The show has such a strong cast in general, and here we meet yet another fan favourite in Rain. Though I will be honest, for a show that usually does character introductions really well, Rain didn't quite grab me. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely love the representation, the complete and utter casualness of it being possibly the best part. I don't think a single person ever had questions or brings up the fact that Rain, or Masha, but they're not in it very much, is they, them, and while making a big deal out of someone's differences can have good stories, I think this is absolutely the way to go from now on. And hey, Rain won me over in the long run. Still, despite their introduction, I'd say it's an Ida episode just as much, if not more. Specifically, her relationship with Rain and Luz and King, and how she fears losing them. The whole bit with King talking about Lee ending up to being legally changing my name is equal parts hilarious, heartwarming, and really fucking dark near the middle of the episodes, and one of the most beautifully animated, beautifully scored scenes of the show. Like, it's not as overt as some of the other stuff, which we'll get to soon, but the voice actors knock it out of the park with lines like,
But it'll stop the Emperor, right?
and
Ida, do you have kids?
the abruptness of it all does take away from it at least a little, but it doesn't stop it from being a really shocking moment of attempted, well, apparently it's best for me to not use the S word right now, so I'll just use the other one, self-sacrifice for her kids, because of the growing feeling of uselessness without magic. And on Rain's side, it makes a lot of sense why they wouldn't want to endanger Ida after this. The episode also introduces us properly to Darius and Eberwolf, and I mean, what more can I say? Eberwolf is a wonderful little scrunkly who has done nothing wrong ever, and Darius really should have been the main character of an episode with Hunter at some point, or at least a B-plot. When it comes to the whole inside spy against the big bad guy, at least for me, they always seem to be the jumpy, nervy type, which I guess can make a lot of sense from their perspective. Like, you would expect someone like that to be always afraid or looking over their shoulder. But on the other hand, someone as cool and callous as Darius would definitely fit in with ease with the head covens. Season 2 of The Owl House is really just one of the best seasons of anything ever, especially animated show-wise. Oh, yesterday's lie. You're a tricky one. On one hand, you're ridiculously emotional and exceptional thematically, with very big True Colours vibes, and those are good vibes to get. On the other hand, you have the museum manager, who just feels a little too much in terms of his tone, talking about Mewtwo and wearing ridiculous armour in the wrong place. It feels kind of like Tibbles, if Tibbles was a primary antagonist in King's Tide and not Really Small Problems. But on rewatch, at least he doesn't have as much screen time as I remember. Instead, the majority of screen time is for V, and good. V is one of those characters who does feel genuinely hurt by the show's shortening, mostly because she's only in the human realm and thus can't show up again till season 3, unless they did like a V episode, which would only take time away from our characters and plot. But enough about that. For now, they work wonderfully, in part to remind Luz of the life she's run away from, and also as her own character. So often in the Owl House we have characters who, unless the plot is kicking in hard, are quippy and generally don't seem too frightened in the presence of danger. Not here though, and I'm starting to see why, because V panicking, and the phrase is probably overused these days, but I do feel it fits well, going through some PTSD when in a cage is utterly horrifying and heartbreaking. Honestly, if we ever get an Owl House spin-off or continuation or even just a comic, she is my top pick for the protagonist. Then there's Camila, who is, oh my god, can I say, the best, most realistic cartoon parent in recent memory. I admit, on first watch, I hadn't thought much about her up until now. But of course, all the fandom will have seen throughout the months and years of waiting is her wanting to send her daughter to normal camp. But after this episode, any apathy or negativity surrounding her character is blown away, mostly. While it's true her final dialogue and begging for Luz to stay is a bit much, and is teetering on the edge of forced for conflict, I think it's reasonable for a panicking widow to say those things to her only daughter. And like, come on, do I even have to say anything about the imagery here? It's simple, but it's some of the show's most eye-catching, beautiful scenes. I mentioned at the start of this episode that it's kinda like True Colours, and if you haven't seen Amphibia, skip to the next entry in the timecode. And if you have, both are about this fantasy adventure absolutely crashing down on our characters' heads. Both of them have experienced some major hardships in this new world, namely the season 1 finales, but this is where it really feels like the rose-tinted glasses are off. The situation is no longer one of joy and excitement, there's more major shit coming both plot-wise and emotion-wise, and all I'll say now is Owl House sticks the landing quite a bit better. Alright, now, here's the thing. Half of O Titan Where Art Thou is a liar reveal plot. Yeah, I know, right? After everything I've said about him. And you know what? You know what? It works. Really, really friggin' well. Like, not even just okay, but to the point where it's a highlight of the episode and one of the highlights of the show as a whole. So let's break down why this is so great in comparison to past eye-roll inducing liar reveal plots here. First, the characters and their relationship. When Gus was lying in his past episodes, it was either to brand new characters who he and we the audience had no real attachment to, or Luz, who's obviously the main character and his buddy, but they'd interacted with each other about three and a half episodes by this point. It wasn't too much. Beyond that, there's tone and there's reasoning. Obviously, Luz and Ida's clash over the deception is serious. Like, serious even for most of Season 2's episodes. There's tears, there's anger, there's fighting. And the reasoning, well, is to keep what is essentially her adoptive daughter by this point safe and alive. Whereas for Gus, it was either to make himself look good or... Honestly, I have no idea why he lied in this one. It was pretty clearly just for drama. And as mentioned, this isn't just characters who have just met or are just pretty good friends. This is the main duo who we follow for almost 2 full seasons now, who we know love each other dearly, and the fact that neither the lying or them actively fighting each other doesn't feel forced in the slightest is testament to the show's amazing character writing. We've known for a long while now that Ida loves Luz like she'd love any daughter, and because of that only wants her to be safe for what's to come. It works wonders both in terms of character and in making the show feel more mature than it probably should. Whew! Okay, what else is there? There's the whole obviously take outfits for sneaking into the enemy base bit, which would normally be a little too goofy for my liking this late in the game, but it actually helps in establishing the general mood of the Isles in the final days and hours before the Day of Unity, in this mad rush to get everything done. And then there's the king half of this episode, which I have less to talk on than I thought I would. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot to love here. Lilith perhaps at her most entertaining here, and to say my jaw was on the floor in a good way when Steve himself got character development is an understatement. Maybe it's because a lot of his part is a montage, a really good montage mind you, filled with a lot of little details. The end of King's character arc is really nice. It's great to see him come full circle. Yeah, that's about all I have to really say. His conversation with Steve at the end is great. Yep. Dang, no wonder negative analysis videos tend to be more popular writing wise. They're much easier to write. But to be honest, I'm starting to run out of negative things to say about these episodes. We're at another point where you could honestly swap around the next 5 entries and I wouldn't argue much. Honestly, I have no idea how well regarded an episode Eclipse Lake is in the fandom. Hopefully I don't get lynched for it being this high, but this is without a doubt one of the most rewatchable episodes of the entire show for me. It's an absolute banger. The episode has it all, but what I enjoy the most when it comes to the Owl House? It has in spades. Awesome fight scenes and great character introspection with some really well built characters. Specifically, this time focusing on fan favourites, is me and the fan. Hunter and Amity. There's Ida, King and Kikimora too, of course, and I've heard people say our other 2 protagonists are acting out of character here, and to be perfectly honest, I just don't see it. Ida's always been light-hearted, cocky and extra to a fault, and I think it's entirely in character for her to get a little high off the fact that she has some form of magic again. And King is a little kid who got powers for the first time. Yeah, that clocks out. And honestly, I think the banter between these 2 are some of the best of the series. And for the first time, a face reveal of Belos. His whole scene with Hunter is great stuff. As someone who didn't clock into the Philip plot twist till the last minute, him talking about the fact that he's been to Earth before was absolutely fascinating to me. I feel like kind of an idiot about that now, but let's just ignore that, woo! But yeah, Hunter and Amity are the stars of this episode. And despite how much I love Luz, heck, she's my favourite character in the show, I also love that she takes a back seat here. It's really sweet seeing Amity and Ida interact, and fascinating watching her and Hunter. Speaking of whom, this might actually be the episode where I think he's at his best. We see his utter desperation to please Bellows both in obvious ways, like his breakdown at the end of the episode, good god that voice actor can voice act, and the panicked and aggressive way he fights in stark contrast to Amity's cool and collective precise attacks. But also in ways that aren't immediately obvious, like how he talks to Amity about her problems with Luz. Not just the whole disappointing someone who thinks you're special part, but also the way he intrudes on her boundaries, immediately assumes the worst, seeing failure when there's almost nothing to see. I'm sure I could say the same about so many characters, but I so wish we got more of this Amity-Hunter duo. They work so perfectly as a more serious duo of characters in comparison to the likes of Ida and King. Speaking of King, I'm actually really happy that he's the one who figures out Liz's weirdness at just a glance. Amity might be her girlfriend, awesome girlfriend, but King's known her for a lot longer, so it's really sweet to see the little brother figure able to show his insider knowledge. As for Amity herself, I've seen people say this is where she just kind of becomes Luz's girlfriend, but this is one of my favourite episodes with her as her own character. In previous episodes, we've dealt with her mother's hold over her in a very obvious, albeit effective, way. But this really delves into how her upbringing has affected her way of seeing the world, how she has such a lack of self-love and a need to be seen by others, something that's actually been in the series since the very start. I think it's so well done how they managed to take two characters who really are in the same kind of situation, put them together and have them bounce off each other, and not even have the audience realise how similar they are until they really spell it out. And lastly, speaking of spells, oh my god, that final battle! It might actually be my favourite fight in the whole series animation-wise. No lie, it's definitely either that or the final fight I'm watching and dreaming. I'm always a sucker for villain captured and forced to work with the hero / working with the hero against a larger threat kind of stories, and Eclipse Lake gives me that and so much more. Reaching Out is definitely one of those episodes. You know, the ones where I wouldn't say it's carried by one particular moment or scene, but, well, it's definitely remembered fondly for that one part in particular. And you know exactly what I mean for this, so let's go over everything else first, shall we? The episode gives the Blights some much needed love, as beyond Amity, the twins and Adalia have had like one episode where they're a focus, and Alador has had pretty much nothing, poor guy. Where even escaping Expulsion just had him quietly follow his wife most of the time, which, yes, I understand was the point, but it didn't give us much to work with. But here, I think Alador is actually written really well. He's not a great person, maybe not even a good person, at least right now, and the show goes out of its way to acknowledge that. But neither is he an irredeemable monster, he just needs to change. And over the course of the next few episodes, we do see that come to light. So great stuff here. The Bonesborough Brawl and the final fight with Warden Wrath is also great in that it gives us some genuine Owl House action without massive stakes to focus on. The magic system, both the Coven system and the glyphs, is really cool, and I am happy it takes a front seat for a good chunk of the episodes. But the star here is Luz. Oh, Luz. We know by now just what happened to this poor girl by season 3, but this is really the first time that we see her so off. Yes, she's gone through some pretty terrible stuff, but most of the time she manages to bounce back, if only with the emotional support of Ida, King and Amity, but this is the first time we see her crack, especially around Ida and Amity. And on rewatch, knowing what we know, every time that phone of hers buzzes it's crushing, with everything coming to a head not at the big action scene, but in the moments of losing Amity just talking. This is some of the best work the Owl House has to offer. The excellent script, voice actors, animation and music, or lack thereof in the right time, all combines to make such a powerful and mature scene. A deceased parent is of course nothing new when it comes to fiction, but I really appreciated how it and Luz are handled here. We suddenly get a brand new side to our spunky, sparky protagonist, her repressing her emotions. We've seen this already with her guilt, and the way she throws herself into danger and punishes herself because of it. But this kind of overwhelming anxiety whenever you get a brief moment to yourself, it's shockingly realistic, and it's really impressive just how far they go with it. Heck, all this emotion about her father, and the only glimpse we get of him is that half of the face in the photo. I really like that the team has that restraint. They could have gone all in with a flashback or something with him and Luz, but they know that she's enough to carry this on her own. And call me morbid, but to put it this way, we could even see it as her fading memories, considering he passed when she was a little kid. Theories aside, I don't have much more to say other than Luz and Amity's conversation under the Grom tree are some of my favourite scenes of the show bar none. Bittersweet and heartbreaking. On a lighter note, I actually really like Edric's B-plot here too. His struggles were surprisingly relatable, at least for me, and I'm always down for characters you'd never expect to interact having really great chemistry. Go off. You know, for an episode this high ranked, it really doesn't start off that well. I'm sorry, I don't care how funny or demented he is. In a world of literal magic, you can't convince me that a birdworm is able to take on a small army of what is supposedly the best, brightest and most magically proficient witches of the Isles. And the writing team knows this, which is why the scouts are using swords and nets and not, magic. It's the last bastion of the show feeling more comedy focused than action and adventure focused, and I can't say I'm too sad to see it go when you look at everything afterwards. Oh, and I guess Willow and Gus are here as well. Yep, they are definitely here. They certainly add a lot to this. Hey, it's still a season 1 episode. I do like Willow and Gus, I promise, but...
This is not your best work, Chris.
And this whole relics thing with the healing hat and everything just seems kind of underbaked. It's Lucy's entire reasoning for getting herself placed in danger, and thus the reason we get our showdown and Ida losing her magic, but the writers get rid of it as soon as they possibly can. I'd have taken any single line explanation as to why it wasn't important. But let's be honest, we're not here for any of that. We're here for Ida v Lilith, and oh my god does it deliver everything you'd ever want and more! Their clash in Covention gave you an idea of what fully grown witches can do in a proper fight, but it turns out that was just a taster. Like, the moment Ida enters, you know that she is no longer playing around. Any doubts you might have had on whether the Owl Lady is all talk are immediately eviscerated. I don't think I have to tell you how beautifully animated Ida vs Lilith Round 2 is. If you've watched this late into the video, then you'll have watched it 3 times at least. And of course, there's Lilith's reveal, which, considering how goofy the show can be pretty commonly up to this point, it's really dark, and it's completely allowed to be dark, and it's absolutely friggin' fantastic. Like, as you can tell, I do have my issues with this episode, but they almost don't matter because of this showdown. And after a full season of Luz and Ida bonding, developing a really beautiful little relationship of 2 weirdos completing each other, even throughout everything else the show throws at us over season 2 and 3, and it throws a lot, Thank You for Being in My Life might just be the single most heartbreaking moment Owl House has to offer. Combine that with an extremely effective first appearance of Emperor Bellos. They knew how to make this guy terrifying when compared to Lilith from the start, and it really works. You can immediately tell that the plot is kicking into high gear. I'm not going to put it here in case of copyright drama, but go back and watch his first scene. The sound design of the rapidly beating heart, the scraping of his claws, so good. As well as some of my favourite set design of the show in the Emperor's Castle. And the absolutely crushing end of the episode, Lilith's line to Luz, and then the mostly comedic King and the entirely comedic Hooty by this point, simply silently comforting Luz being such a powerful moment. Honestly, Agony of a Witch is the most flawed episode in this top 10, but oh my god, when it delivers, it gives it everything. There's a reason it's still one of the fandom's favourites to this day. Now, I'm trying to keep these little talks from being just plot recaps like so many other reviews and analyses, And, well, that might be tricky here. See, a lot of the analysing comes from character development, plot development and build-up, hints to the future, etc. This is where all that build-up is realised, and it's utterly incredible. Before we go over our heroes, our villains might just be at their best this time. Maybe. It's actually really cool seeing just how good of a villain Bellows is. He's a brilliant mix of realistically deluded, competent, and utterly sadistic. Like, okay, his plan is ridiculous, what with him wanting to return to the human realm and being seen as a king...
Witch Hunter General.
Right, sorry, that. But once the draining spell has begun, he just dips out of there without a second thought. Like, he doesn't even revel in his victory, it's kind of fascinating. Of course, then he goes through a 1-2 combo of betrayal with Kikimora and the Collector, and again, his quiet, calm demeanour being really standout during all this. And since we're on the topic, well, let's talk about the Collector, shall we? Because my god, in this episode they are absolutely incredible. We've talked about Season 3 Collector before, and we will do so again, but Season 2 Physical Form Collector is a force of nature. They're absolutely terrifying, I love it! All this time we've had the build-up of Bellows as this looming, imposing threat, and a great one at that. And King's Tide is where we finally have our long-awaited big boss battle. And that boss battle is really good. His last spar with Luz is great, with the end of it being one of the most underrated, horrifying moments of the Owl House. But once he takes on his monster form, well, he's scary, don't get me wrong, like, that design and the way it moves is absolutely horrifying, I love it. But he honestly doesn't feel too threatening once the cavalry shows up, beyond this little moment with Hunter. And then the Collector steps in, giving us what is, in my opinion, one of the single best scenes in the entire show. The music that's so off and so different from any other track of the show, the looks of abject horror on our heroes' faces and Bellows' voice, the voice and expression of the Collector, and seeing our villain get usurped by one tiny shot in an instant, the threat going from scary madman to cosmic horror child gods, and usually a really good antagonist like Bellows being taken down in one hit like this all of a sudden would really sting. The Collector's been built up for a while now, and much more than that, Bellows didn't lose any potential by being swatted like this. Not just because he survived, but because he played his role to its natural end, and he played it perfectly. Sure, if he'd stayed dead and the Collector was the main antagonist, it would be weird, but even as someone who likes Bellows as a villain, I would be pretty happy with him overall. Because, oh my god, King's Tide Collector is terrifying, and I love it! Okay, but there's more to talk about here than the baddies. Let's talk about Luz, huh? Because while Hollow Mind might have been the episode to break the girl, King's Tide takes those broken pieces and pulverizes them. I've already mentioned her almost petrification, but there's also the ending. God, that ending! Luz resigning herself, her heroic selflessness, now an overwhelming flaw tainted with guilt, a major part of an amazing arc that's way too much to cover here. But I've talked about it elsewhere, wink wink nudge nudge, and there's no way I can't mention that ending. The silence, the pouring rain, the breakdown of Gus, who should be the one ecstatic to be in the human realm, feels so mature and, say it again, heartbreaking. To the point where a blatant Amphibia shoutout kinda takes me out of it. Yeah, there was definitely better places to put this. I'm not a fan, not gonna lie. You know what I am a big fan of though? King's Tide. Incredible finale. I tend to quickly search around Twitter and the subreddit for every episode I've done, just to see the quick TLDR public opinion of each episode. And, well, I never expected to say this, but I think Enchanting Grom Fright is kind of underrated. So, yeah, here's my 2 cents on why Enchanting Grom Fright is a top 5 episode. Boom, here we go. Well, first things first. For the first time since, like, the very first episode, we get to see a proper driving force of the story in play. Lucy's guilt and her relationship with her mother. is something that really helps to ground the character, and thus the show as a whole, even back in her season 1 days when she was more of an upbeat goofball, at least on the outside. Then, Hooty has literally the best line he has in season 1, so, you know, right off the bat, right away, this is gonna be a banger. Honestly, this episode is just peak Hooty all round. It's far and away his best episode until season 2. Seriously, this is where he goes from funny on occasion to absolutely uproarious. Despite the more dramatic moments later, this is probably the funniest episode of season 1 all round. Since comedy is so objective, I can't say much more than that, but it really feels like they've improved so much since the early show. Take the spider gag, for example. Early in the season, I feel like this... that would have just been it, that would be the joke. However, here they set it up beforehand, not only getting a second good joke out of it, but also leaving the viewer wondering if it'll show up again for the rest of the next couple minutes, and being rewarded when it does, making the follow-up even funnier in my eyes. Okay, I want to talk about the dance scene now. Holy shit, I never thought a dance sequence would give me chills, but the Owl House managed it. It was the first time I'd felt anything like this watching the show. I don't need to tell you how good the animation is, you have eyes! There's so many details you can pick out, from the way they're dancing to the magic potentially being more powerful because of Amity's state of mind, to that bop of a score. It's an absolute treat, but I wouldn't say it has to carry the rest of the episode like, say, Agony of a Witch's battle. Before this, we get Lucy's battle with the titular Grom, and the manifestation of her greatest fear, her mum coming back to see what she's been hiding all this time, and hating it, hating her. It works so well with what's to come soon after. The season 1 finale, taking away any chance she might have of breaking the news peacefully. And much later, because yesterday's lie is essentially Grom's vision brought to life, and it makes going back to this episode such a treat. Then there's Amity. She of course shines during this episode, pretty much entirely because of her relationship with Luz. It's grown so much across season 1, and seeing them being able to share some kind of casual banter is really gratifying after everything, and really funny knowing just what comes next. Baby Lumity. Genuinely one of the best LGBT romances I think we have in animation, media in general right now, if not the best in animation. Like, seriously, let me know if there's anything that tops it. And then after that, well, not only do we get a lovely little montage of the most important people in Luz's life in the demon realm, taking a moment to breathe in the beauty of this world, there's the stinger. The letters sent to Camila. Oh my god, that on top of everything else is what made me know I couldn't stop watching this show. It's such a simple premise for a mystery, but it works so friggin' well. It grabbed me so good, and all the little details like Luz's name being spelled wrong at first makes so much sense in retrospect. Great stuff. Enchanting Grom Fright is not perfect. I don't think any episode of The Owl House is. Though, honestly, the biggest criticism I have to call out here is more like a nitpick. The turtle monkey really isn't funny. Yeah, I feel like they think he's really funny here. He's what they end the episode on, and I'm quite glad this is the last we see of him. But other than that, well, The Intruder was what got me watching the show. Understanding Willow was where it ramped up in quality and never went down. But Enchanting Grom Fright was where I first realised I was watching something truly special. Hollow Mind has been described as a horror film, condensed into a 20-minute Disney animation episode. And honestly, I can't say I disagree. This is easily the most overtly, shockingly dark The Owl House gets, and I love it. The second memory, with the early victims of the Coven system? Who knows, maybe censors won't allow the crew to directly say that they're dead, but because of that, it both becomes arguably even darker, and also suits Belos and his mannerisms to an absolute T. And of course, in terms of Belos, I think it should be obvious that this episode is where, as a character, as a villain, he shines like the sun. I love the way they set up the idea that he might regret what he's done, that he might be redeemable. What with the whole sobbing child inner self and Ida mentioning that strong emotions can manifest, is a great red herring. And of course, as we find out here in particular when we enter his memories, is that he is completely irredeemable. Every single piece of dialogue once he appears in the Mindscape either adds to his air of terror, gives more detail to his and or Hunter's backstory, works to further establish his character, or all of the above. Bellows is a maddeningly well-written paradox. He's so simple but seems so complex. He's so over the top and yet feels so realistic. He's both pathetic and ridiculous in his hatred and schemes, and yet absolutely horrifying. Put it this way, he had a god on his side. He had the genie with unlimited wishes. I'd bet dollars to donuts that if he'd just asked nicely, the collector could have... But he doesn't want any of that. His sole and unwavering focus is the death and destruction of these witches. And oh, yeah, this is the first time we meet the collector too. I can't imagine how difficult this guy must have been to animate, but it paid off tenfold. He looks spectacular. It's a very intriguing character introduction. Sometimes, I admit, he can come off as Bill Cipher light. Make no mistake, being compared to Bill in any way is a good thing. But as we know, he establishes himself as very different by the end. Now, in terms of Bellows' memories, is this just a reused background character, or is it meant to be the "Be ye a crab maiden" woman from elsewhere? Because if so, that's a really cool little detail that makes it clear that this doesn't happen too long after Luz's time travel escapades. Which is, honestly, an overlooked piece of the Owl House lore. Put it this way, Philip came to the Demon Realm over 300 years ago. Bellows' reign started 50 years ago. This dude spent 250 years of his life on this quest. His rise is far from instant. There's some pretty immortal hatred right here. Beyond just Bellows though, this episode is great for the development of literally my two favourite characters. It's been a long time coming to see both their reactions to the true nature of the Emperor. And a common theme for these episodes, it seems, it gives us everything we wanted and more. The Philip Bellows twist is not the most intricate of reveals. In fact, most of the fandom managed to guess it beforehand. But, personally, I'd rather have a twist that has a lot of cool and clever pointers towards the truth, than one that's just blatantly out of nowhere just so the audience can have a gasp moment. I've already gone over Luz's arc in a previous video, and this reveals such a gargantuan aspect of it, but for Hunter, his brainwashing and unwavering devotion to Bellows has been written so well in these past few episodes, but here most of all. And the, say it with me now, animated panic attack once he escapes is really freaky in the best of ways. Philip had the kid in a death grip. And after all this, everything we get in the forefront of this episode, there's also a massive backstory entirely via the background portraits. It's debatable on whether it's better to keep the Caleb, Philip, Evelyn story a mystery or to actually explain exactly what happened, but I love how you can just pause Hollow Mind and look. It's absolutely incredible, and there's no way I can fit all this in too. Okay, and there's stuff going on outside the Mindscape too. Because Rain and Darius are silent this episode, it actually lends to some pretty solid character building, because there's a reliance on body language to get the emotions across. Like Darius having to hold Rain back from going to the Owl House, and then the vice versa happens when he hears of Hunter being evolved. Love it! Oh, good god, these are getting to be like a quarter of the lengths of my normal videos on their own. Me writing the script? Good luck to editing me, you're probably gonna have to hate me by now. To those who have watched my channel before, you might be surprised that this isn't number 1, because I adored this episode. And if it seems like I'm talking about it a surprisingly little amount, well, it's probably because I've already done that. But TLDR, it contains some of my favourite, most mind-bending hype moments of the show for me that had me grinning like a maniac the first time I saw them, and every time I've seen them since. However, since the last time I've spoken about it, I've had time to think and time to reflect. And I concede that, despite its massively high highs, the grand finale of the Owl House is not perfect. The heart of the Titan really should have been set up in more detail than just a cool background set piece 2 seasons ago. The Collector still feels like a strange addition. If your name isn't Luz, Ida or King, you're getting a big ol' short end of the stick. And I cannot forgive the audacity of not giving our Lord and Saviour Hooty a single line of dialogue. So yeah, finale, far from perfect. But what it does right, it does so overwhelmingly incredible that it cancels out any issues I might have had with it. The Titan! Belos becoming the Isles, Luz's death and Ida and King snapping because of it. Titan friggin' Luz! Now eat this sucker! The death of Belos/Philip. Watching and Dreaming pulls out all the stops to be as incredible a finale as it can. This isn't just a rollercoaster of emotions. This is one of those bloody G-force devices that astronauts train on. It's amazing. The entirety of the epilogue is especially what I've grown to appreciate most in the months since the show ended. Luz losing and later regaining her connection to the Boiling Isles and its magic are a double whammy of heartbreaking and utterly jovial. The ending to each and every character is pretty much perfect. I especially love what they did with Hunter and Ida. Like, it's not what you would have expected, but it suits them and their arcs perfectly. And the final goodbye is equal parts hilarious and heartbreaking. With how much of an impact it has had on so many, I really don't think this is going to be the last we'll see of the Owl House. But I think it's going to be a good while until we see something new. Especially since there's definitely a couple of unexplored paths we can go down. Until then though, Watching and Dreaming is a worthy finale, and I'd say it sums up the series as a whole. It has flaws, yes, and those flaws are notable, but its incredible majestic highs make this an unforgettable ride by the end. For the vast majority of episodes on this list, a rewatch was pretty much a necessity. For some to remember most of what happened, and for some just to remember the finer details, the things going on between the massive memorable moments. Knock Knock Knockin' on Hooty's Door is not one of those episodes. This episode is a mystery, an enigma, a freakish monstrosity that by all accounts should not exist. In other words, it's pretty dang close to its titular character. Where do I start with this episode? Where do I even begin? The top tier jokes, the emotional gut punch of King's pining and yet hatred for an absentee father, the sudden mystery of King's new powers, perhaps Ida confronting her curse and her past, seeing Ida's dad and how she scarred him with her straight up bright red blood, Ida and Rain confirmed as being a thing, Owlbeast backstory, the very first hints towards the Collector, Ida's acceptance of the curse in one of the most straight up beautifully animated moments of the show, Harpy Ida, Luz gushing over Amity, Amity gushing over Luz, the surprisingly well done cornucopia of hilarity, gooey crushingness, and shame the Tunnel of Love causes, Lumity becoming canon, King's dad showing up, and fitting all of that into a 20-minute episode without any of it feeling rushed is absolute madness, and I love it so much. To go a little deeper into things, I do want to touch base on a few specific moments. Ida's part of the episode in particular. From the start, we've been shown the Owl Lady as being an outcast by choice, something she's cool and confident about being. But here we see that really isn't the case. The curse tearing her apart from her family and her love is pretty horrifying to see, and it makes it all the more cathartic by the end when she finally accepts it as part of her. Even if that already happened a few episodes ago, but you know what, I'll take it. And starts to work with it instead. And we even get some pretty simple, clever backstory for the Owlbeast, seeing its side of things, and finally finding out why this curse was so bamboozling to everyone. And, the Harpy Ida, yeah, that's Harpy Ida, yeah, that's all I have to say about that. Before we get to the Lumity end of things, I do want to interject with King, just so he doesn't get too sidelined, even if he is undoubtedly the weakest part of the episode. Which is saying a lot, because it's still really good. I adore the subversion of the usual "it doesn't matter who you are because you're our friend" line. It's not a bad line, but it's a line that King's heard a lot of before, and it's entirely understandable that he'd want these answers. It really humanises him, you know? Anyway, right, where was I? Oh, right, yeah, that. Yeah, this episode is pretty perfect when it comes to Amity and Luz, and I don't use that term lightly. It's every mushy Lumity fan comic smooshed into one giant tunnel of love, and you get a very appropriate reaction from both characters, I think. Amity having her gay panic go into absolute overdrive, and Luz being completely overcome by panic and fear and shame of being rejected. It's a scenario that couldn't have happened without someone as utterly insane as Hooty, and it somehow manages to be both incredibly over the top, and yet feel incredibly real in terms of their reactions at the same time. Then there's the confession, which, of course, is one of those scenes that I genuinely can't watch without smiling at least a little bit. In terms of things to praise here, it's the body language I adore. You can tell exactly what these characters are thinking and feeling just by how they move, which really can't be easy to replicate in art like this. Good job on the teams behind it. All in all, Knockin' on Hooty's Door is an episode all about emotion, confusion, anger, hate, acceptance, fear, and love. Love between two lovers, and love from the viewer to Hooty to making all this happen. And then seething hatred, Hooty, you piece of bird shit! This was, as you might imagine, rather tricky. As I mentioned before, no episode is perfect, so before I get into everything, let's quickly go over what I didn't like about Thanks to Them, things that don't have the answer of, if it was a full season we'd get more. The episode isn't very funny, and yes, that is almost entirely by design, but there are a small handful of jokes here and there, and besides a couple brief moments across the montage, most of them don't really hit. Besides that, the masks blowing in is kind of out of the blue. I don't know, I'm trying to be fair here because, oh lordy, I love this episode. Similarly with Watching and Dreaming, I've talked about this one before, specifically with how it compares to Amphibia's version of similar events, and then talking about Hunter's Possession. I think I covered the latter pretty thoroughly, so I'd recommend watching that if you want to know more of my thoughts about Witch Hunter. Beyond that, oh wow. Thanks to Them feels like the best of what the other top 10 episodes have to offer in one huge package, combining the incredible hype of episodes like Agony of a Witch and Eclipse Lake, moments of incredible emotion like Reaching Out and Yesterday's Lie, and a complete onslaught of information and just things our characters get into like Knockin', all wrapped up in a really neat package in the human realm that's part Scooby-Doo mystery, part horror movie, and part lowest point character study for Luz. And it's that last part that really makes it. I'm not sure what the most emotional scene in the Owl House is, but I think I know my top 3. One's the final battle with the theme song blasting in the background from Watching and Dreaming, and the other 2 come from this episode. One I'll talk about in a sec, and the other is Luz's video diary. In some way, this scene acts along the same lines as a plot twist. Hear me out. A plot twist is, at its best, something that redefines a lot of what came before. Not that it didn't make sense before necessarily, but now you know the full/true story, you're able to see everything from another angle, and it's so freaking good. One way the series does this is with the Titan looking over Luz and King, but the other was with the Azura books and Nani, and her desire to be with the people that loved the same things she did.
Azura Book Club? Azura Book Club? As long as it's a secret club, okay?
Everything from Ida almost burning the book when she first arrived, to meeting someone who had read the same series, to wanting to be like that character more than anything else. Speaking of which, I mean, did you know in that scene with the Azura movie in the background where she feels overwhelming shame because of the Belos situation, her eyes look like they're glowing blue from the screen like people do when they're controlled by Belos? Or the changing background of her video diaries to suit her emotions? Or, this is why I was planning to make a whole video about this episode. There's so many little details and big moments to go over. Did I even mention that, not counting villains, it has the only named character death in the series? Look, if you couldn't tell by my channel and, well, everything, I am a bird guy. I like my birds. Used to have a pet bird who, to be completely honest, was a little rascal of my own. So yeah, everything that happened to Flapjack in this episode hit some buttons for me, shall we say. I hope to see you again, Flapjack, if we ever get some more detail on the Caleb and Evelyn story. On a lighter note, there's the side characters. Willow and Gus are an incredibly chaotic duo in this episode, and I love it. This is probably the best episode for their friendship since their very first introduction. Amity is allowed to chill out and let her guard down for the most part, and seeing her be so casual with Luz is amazing. And oh my god, I completely forgot to mention the whole coming out to Camila part. Oh my god, I forgot to mention Camila in general. With how often parents are put to the side in young adult stuff, it's great to see a biological parent be so important to the story. Chalk up Camila's nightmare and talk with Luz afterwards as yet another one of the best scenes the show has to offer, at least in my opinion. It's very impressive how, in the span of just this episode, she went from a character who was apparently pretty disliked in the fandom to a fan favourite, and one of my favourites across the show. For a series all about magic and demons, having such a well-written normal mother is perhaps one of the most unusual things it does. You know what else is unusual? The Owl House. We don't get a show like this every so often. Last thing we did was probably Gravity Falls, and yes, I am saying that as a big Amphibia fan. And when we get something brand new, or, you know, something like Invincible Season 2 or Arcane Season 2, which, let's be honest, might be out by the time I finish editing this, I will be here a while. I will be there for them. And if you're somehow still watching, I would absolutely love it for you to like and subscribe if this is up your street. If this does well, I might just make some more like it. But, well, I'm recording this when part 1 has came out and it's not done very well, so we'll see. And at the time of speaking, I'm planning to make a Discord server, so that might be in the link too. Check it out if you like. And one more thing, would you ever consider donating to me on Patreon? It's a genuine question, I just want to throw that out there. Pretty much every single big YouTuber I've ever seen does it, but I have no idea what would constitute the right amount of subscribers to make that happen. Just a question. Right, that's it. We're done. I'm free. Until next time, friends.